The courthouse in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, rose like a fortress against the heavy southern morning air. The sky hung low, the humidity thick enough to choke every breath. Judge Naomi Carter moved quickly across the parking lot, her heels striking sharp echoes against the pavement. She was late, and today was not the kind of day she could afford delays. This wasn't just another trial. This was the case that could shake the foundations of justice in the state. Her head ached beneath the weight of it all. A young man, Marcus Daniels, had been arrested just outside his own apartment. The officers claimed he matched the description. Those words, she had heard them too many times before. Words often used as a shield for prejudice. Naomi reached the courthouse doors and caught her reflection in the glass. Tall, poised, and cloaked in authority, she looked every bit the seasoned judge she was. But inside, anxiety coiled in her chest like a living thing. "Focus," she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. There could be no hesitation today. Naomi shifted her ID badge that hung from her neck and veered toward the side entrance, hoping to avoid the crowd of reporters that had swarmed the main doors. Cameras and microphones were already pointed, eager to capture every word of this trial. But before she could raise her badge to the scanner, a voice cut through the thick air. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification." Naomi stopped, her pulse quickening. A young white officer, no older than 25, stood stiffly in front of the door. His eyes fixed on her with a look she had felt too many times before, suspicion laced with something colder. "I'm Judge Carter," she said evenly, holding out her badge. But the officer didn't even glance at it. His hand hovered near his belt, far too close to the handcuffs clipped at his side. "There's been an incident nearby," he said flatly, "and you match the description of someone we're looking for." For a moment, Naomi's breath caught. Match the description. The phrase carried the weight of every injustice she had spent her life fighting against. Standing outside the very courthouse where she had delivered justice countless times, she was suddenly reduced to a suspect. Her heart pounded, but her expression remained calm. Losing control now would only escalate things. "I'm here for a trial," she said firmly, "and I'm already late." She extended the badge again, her voice steady. The officer's name tag read Ryan Walker. His posture was unflinching, his hand still resting dangerously close to the cuffs. "Doesn't matter who you say you are," Walker said, his tone clipped. "You'll need to answer some questions before I let you through." Naomi's patience was fraying. She had spent her life delivering justice, and here she was, barred from her own courthouse, facing the same prejudice she was sworn to fight. The irony cut like glass. Before Naomi could respond, another voice rang out. "What's going on here?" Both she and Walker turned. An older black officer approached, his face worn with age and experience, eyes narrowing in disbelief as he recognized Naomi. "Judge Carter?" he asked, his voice carrying both concern and authority. "Yes," Naomi answered, relief flickering in her chest. "I'm just trying to get inside." The older man, Sergeant David Harris, shifted his gaze sharply to Walker. "Stand down," Harris ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She's the judge presiding over the Daniels case." Walker stiffened, his jaw tightening. He muttered something under his breath, but finally lowered his hand from his belt and stepped aside. Naomi exhaled slowly, forcing down the anger burning inside her. She nodded gratefully at Harris, then pushed through the doors into the courthouse. The courthouse walls rose around her, familiar, sterile, and cold. Normally they brought comfort, but today they pressed in like ice. The incident outside lingered, heavy in her chest. Naomi had faced battles like this before, but the exhaustion of it was beginning to wear her down. Still, she pushed the weight aside. She could not let it shake her. Not today. Ahead lay the courtroom, packed to the brim. Reporters crowded the back rows, pens and cameras ready. Jurors sat stiff and silent, waiting for her to call the session. And at the defense table sat Marcus Daniels. Young, barely 25, exhaustion etched across his face. Naomi gripped her gavel tightly as she stepped to the bench. The moment she had dreaded, the moment she had prepared for, was here. Naomi lifted her gavel. The courtroom hushed. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the sound of shuffling feet echoed as everyone stood. Naomi took her seat at the bench, her robe heavy on her shoulders. "You may be seated," she said firmly. Her voice steady though her heart was still recovering from the confrontation outside. The case of Marcus Daniels was about to begin. A young man wrongfully accused, arrested outside his own apartment complex, and charged for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The prosecutor began with sharp precision. Witness after witness painted Marcus as out of place, repeating phrases Naomi despised. When Marcus finally took the stand, the courtroom grew still. He looked no older than 25, yet his face carried the weight of someone who had lived a lifetime of battles. His hands trembled as he clutched the railing of the witness stand. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," Marcus said softly, his voice cracking. "I was just trying to get home. I didn't even know why they were stopping me. I kept asking, but they wouldn't tell me. They just assumed." His words lingered like smoke in the air. Naomi leaned forward, her grip tightening on the gavel. She had heard countless testimonies like this, but today, after her own encounter outside, it cut deeper. Halfway through Marcus's testimony, the heavy doors creaked open. Naomi's stomach sank when she saw Officer Ryan Walker step inside. Gone was the stiff confidence he had displayed outside. He looked pale, uneasy, and far smaller than before. He moved toward the witness stand, his eyes darting nervously as if searching for an escape. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Officer Walker, can you describe the events leading up to the arrest of Marcus Daniels?" Walker shifted in his seat. His voice faltered. I was patrolling the area, and I saw Daniels. He looked out of place." The words hung heavy in the air. Naomi's jaw tightened. Out of place. The same code she had heard for years, always used to justify profiling. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Out of place? Officer, what exactly about Mr. Daniels made him suspicious?" Walker hesitated. The silence stretched. His eyes flicked from the prosecutor to the jury, then to Marcus, who sat stoic at the defense table, fists clenched. "He was acting nervous," Walker finally muttered, "looking around, like he was up to something." "And what was he doing when you first saw him?" the prosecutor pressed. Walker swallowed hard. "He was waiting, just standing there, like he was waiting for someone." "So standing and waiting is suspicious behavior now?" Walker's face flushed. "It wasn't just that. It was the way he looked around, like he didn't belong there." The phrase struck Naomi like a blade. Didn't belong. The excuse used to criminalize innocent people for simply existing. The prosecutor's voice was ice. "So, to be clear, Mr. Daniels was in his own neighborhood, waiting for a ride, and you decided he looked suspicious. Is that correct, Officer Walker?" Walker's silence spoke louder than words. Finally, he muttered, "Yes." The jury shifted uneasily, some visibly disturbed. Naomi scanned their faces, some filled with recognition, others caught in conflict. The prosecutor pressed harder. "And during your search, Officer Walker, did you find anything to suggest criminal activity?" Walker hesitated, his throat dry. "No." The prosecutor straightened, her voice ringing through the room. "So Marcus Daniels was arrested, humiliated, and dragged through this system, for nothing more than waiting for a ride in his own neighborhood." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. The courtroom air was thick, each breath weighted with tension. Officer Ryan Walker fidgeted on the stand, his earlier bravado stripped away. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the silence. "No further questions, Your Honor." Naomi nodded, her gavel resting heavily in her hand. She studied Walker as he stepped down, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. The young officer who had once blocked her outside now looked like a man drowning under his own words. The defense attorney attempted to soften the blow. She argued Walker was a well-meaning officer who had simply made a mistake. But the weakness of the argument showed. The jury's eyes told the truth. They weren't convinced. The prosecutor's closing remarks landed with sharp clarity. This is not just about one wrongful arrest. This is about a system where prejudice wears the uniform of authority. It's time we confront it. Naomi's chest tightened. She had seen cases like this before, too many times. But never had the irony cut so close, not after what had happened to her outside that very courthouse. The jury filed out to deliberate. Silence settled in their absence, broken only by the scratch of reporters' pens and the quiet shifting of bodies in the gallery. Naomi leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Moments stretched into hours. Then the creak of the jury room door. Everyone turned. The jurors re-entered, their faces tight with gravity. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with dark hair, rose, paper trembling in her hand. "We have, Your Honor." She unfolded the slip, her voice firm but laced with emotion. "In the case of Officer Ryan Walker, we find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination." The words crashed through the room like thunder. Marcus sat still, his eyes wide, frozen in disbelief. Slowly, tears welled in his eyes as his lawyer touched his shoulder gently. Relief mixed with exhaustion. A lifetime of weight lifted in one fragile moment. Across the room, Walker stood stiff, his face drained of color, his fists clenched, his jaw locked tight. For a moment, Naomi thought he might collapse under the crushing reality of the verdict. Naomi raised her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters rushing, families crying, voices clashing. Yet Naomi remained still, her gaze fixed on the young man at the defense table, and then on the officer who now carried the stain of his own actions. The courtroom emptied slowly, voices fading into echoes down the marble hallways. Judge Naomi Carter remained seated at the bench, the weight of the verdict pressing heavily on her shoulders. Justice had been served, yes, but it did not feel like victory. The gavel still rested in her hand when the doors creaked open once more. To her surprise, Officer Ryan Walker stepped inside. His pale face was drawn, his steps hesitant, as though each one cost him something. He didn't return to his seat at the defense table. Instead, he walked toward the bench. "Your Honor," Walker said, his voice unsteady. "May I speak?" Naomi studied him carefully. He looked smaller now, stripped of the authority he had once wielded. She gave a curt nod. "You may." Walker's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hands trembled at his sides. I made a mistake. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. I thought I was protecting the community, but I see now I was wrong. I hurt Mr. Daniels. I let my bias decide for me, and I am truly sorry." The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Every word clung in the air. Naomi's chest tightened. The apology was raw, but it could never undo the harm that had been done. Naomi's voice was calm but unyielding. "Your apology is noted, Officer Walker. But understand this, the harm you caused runs deeper than one man. Actions like yours erode trust in entire communities. Sorry will never be enough. Change requires accountability. It requires action." Walker's head lowered. "I understand." Naomi dismissed him with a nod. His steps echoed hollowly as he left, the door shutting softly behind him. For a long while, Naomi sat alone, the silence pressing in like a storm waiting to break. Later that evening, the door opened again. Sergeant David Harris entered, his expression lined with fatigue, but also with quiet determination. "Judge Carter," he said gently, "may I have a word?" Naomi gestured for him to sit. Harris lowered himself into the chair across from her, folding his hands. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice low, "for how you handled the case. You held us accountable, and that's exactly what we need." Naomi sighed, leaning back. "It doesn't feel like enough, Sergeant. This was one case. For every Marcus Daniels, there are countless others who never see justice." Harris nodded slowly. "You're right, but that's why we keep pushing. This may not change everything, but every step forward matters." Naomi looked into his eyes, seeing the same exhaustion mirrored there. He had been in law enforcement for decades. He had seen injustice firsthand, yet still carried hope. That, in itself, was a comfort. "What about Walker?" Naomi asked quietly. "What happens to officers like him, those who've been taught to see people a certain way?" Harris exhaled heavily. "There are too many like him. Some don't even realize their bias. But there are others like me, fighting to change things from the inside. It's not easy, and I can't promise we'll fix everything. But I'll keep trying, for as long as I can." Naomi's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. She nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we both keep fighting, piece by piece." Harris rose, his frame tall and steady despite his fatigue. He gave her a respectful nod. "That's how change begins, Judge." Naomi watched him walk away, his footsteps fading into the distance. The empty courtroom swallowed her once more. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed like a beehive. Reporters filled the steps, their cameras poised, voices sharp with anticipation. This wasn't just a local case anymore. It had become a national story, a symbol of racial profiling and justice on trial. Inside her chambers, Judge Naomi Carter sipped her coffee slowly, the steam rising like smoke from a battlefield. Stacks of case files cluttered her desk, but her eyes weren't on them. They were fixed on the window, on the restless crowd gathering outside. This case had become more than Marcus Daniels. It was about the system itself. A knock broke her thoughts. "Come in," Naomi called. Her clerk, Emily, stepped inside, clutching a slim folder. Her young face was taut with tension. "The jury's ready," Emily said quietly. Naomi nodded, rising. She smoothed the front of her robe, her movements steady despite the storm in her chest. "Let's do this," she whispered. The echo of her heels filled the hallway as she walked toward the courtroom. The silence of the courthouse pressed in, as though the very walls were holding their breath. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras flashing. Families filled the front, the air thick with nerves and expectation. At the defense table, Marcus Daniels sat with his lawyer. His hands folded, his face calm but exhausted. Naomi could see it in his eyes. The hope, the fear, the weight of every sleepless night. Across the room, Officer Ryan Walker looked different now. His eyes darted nervously, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the table. Gone was the confidence of a man in uniform. In its place stood a man cornered by his own choices. "Please bring in the jury," Naomi ordered. The doors swung open. 12 jurors filed in, faces unreadable, each step echoing with finality. The forewoman clutched a slip of paper as though it were a lifeline. She rose, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "We have reached a verdict, Your Honor." Naomi's hands rested on the bench, calm on the outside, though her pulse thundered within. "Please read the verdict," she said firmly. The forewoman cleared her throat, her voice firm as she spoke the words that would ripple far beyond the walls of this courtroom. "In the case of Officer Ryan Walker, we find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination." The words echoed like a hammer striking steel. A murmur swept through the gallery, hushed but powerful. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashing. At the defense table, Marcus froze. Disbelief washed over him, followed by a tear that slid silently down his cheek. His lawyer placed a gentle hand on his back, whispering comfort. Across the room, Walker stood motionless, his face pale as chalk, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. The verdict had struck him like a blow he could not dodge. Naomi raised her gavel and brought it down with a firm strike. "Court is adjourned." The courtroom had nearly emptied. Reporters rushed out to broadcast the verdict. Family members huddled around Marcus Daniels, offering hugs and relief. The sound of joy and chaos faded into the marble halls. Judge Naomi Carter remained behind, still seated at the bench, her gavel resting quietly in front of her. She felt the weight of the day pressing against her chest. Justice had been served, yes, but it didn't feel complete. As she gathered her files, she noticed movement near the exit. It was Officer Ryan Walker. His uniform seemed looser on him now, as though the verdict had shrunk him down. He leaned against the wall, pale, his eyes cast downward. For a moment, Naomi considered walking past without a word. But then he spoke. "Judge Carter." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Naomi stopped. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. "Yes." Walker straightened, though only slightly. His eyes lifted to hers, filled with regret and confusion. I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. His words stumbled, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She had heard those words countless times before, from defendants, from officers, from people who had caused harm but refused to carry its full weight. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" she repeated, her voice cool, almost sharp. "But it did happen, Officer Walker. To Marcus, to countless others, to people like me." Walker winced but didn't retreat. I know I screwed up. I know I let my biases get in the way. But it's not as simple as undoing everything I've been taught." Naomi crossed her arms, her robe falling in sharp folds around her. "So what changed for you? Is it because you got caught? Or is it because, for the first time, someone held you accountable?" Walker's face flushed with guilt. He shifted uncomfortably, but his voice came low and honest. "Both. I thought I was doing my job, protecting the community. But I was wrong. I see that now." Naomi inhaled deeply, her shoulders heavy. She had walked this tightrope her entire career, the line between accountability and understanding. But tonight she was tired. "Officer Walker," she said, her voice measured but firm, "what you did goes beyond a mistake. It is part of a larger problem. And while I hear your apology, I hope you understand. Sorry will never be enough. Not for Marcus. Not for me. Not for anyone whose life has been reduced to a stereotype by people in positions of power." Walker nodded slowly, guilt flooding his expression. "I know. I'll do better. I'll learn from this. I promise." Naomi studied him, her gaze unflinching. She had seen many men make promises like his, only to repeat the same patterns. Yet, for the first time, there was a flicker of sincerity in his eyes. Whether it would lead to change, only time would tell. "I hope you do," Naomi said finally, "because men like you, officers in uniform, have the power to either perpetuate this cycle or help dismantle it." Walker swallowed hard. "I'll keep that in mind." Naomi gave him one final look, then turned and walked toward the exit. The heavy courthouse doors opened, and she stepped out into the humid Louisiana night. Behind her, Walker remained frozen in the shadows, burdened by his own conscience. The courthouse front steps were already swarming with cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. Reporters shouted over one another, desperate for a soundbite, a headline, a quick piece of history to sell. But Judge Naomi Carter avoided them. She slipped quietly out of the side exit, the thick Louisiana air wrapping around her like a damp shroud. The chaos of voices faded, replaced by the low hum of the city at dusk. Naomi's heels clicked softly on the stone steps. She drew in a deep breath, letting the heavy silence settle over her. Her mind drifted back to the trial, to Marcus's trembling voice, to Walker's hollow apology. The system hadn't been fixed today. It hadn't even been dented. One case, one verdict, too small to cure centuries of injustice. She reached her car, fumbling for her keys, when a voice called softly from behind her. "Judge Carter." Naomi turned. Marcus Daniels stood there, his attorney a step behind. His face carried exhaustion, but his eyes carried something else. Hope. He approached slowly, his voice low but steady. "I just wanted to thank you for everything." Naomi's heart clenched. She shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me, Marcus. I was just doing my job." Marcus disagreed, his voice firm despite his fatigue. "No, it was more than that. You gave me a voice. This trial, it wasn't just about me. It was about showing people what really happens, what we go through." Naomi swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She knew his words were true. "I hope this is a step toward change," Naomi said softly, though her tone carried the weight of caution. But remember, it's just one case. The road ahead is long. Marcus gave a faint, tired smile. I know, but it's a start. And for that, I'm grateful. Naomi nodded slowly, watching as he turned and walked away with his attorney. His shoulders, though heavy with exhaustion, carried a glimmer of hope she could not ignore. She stood still, the evening air pressing against her skin. Marcus was right. This trial had been a start, but only a start. For every Marcus Daniels, there were countless others whose stories would never reach a courtroom. The system was vast, its roots tangled deep in the soil of history. One verdict could not undo it. One apology could not mend it. But steps, small, stubborn steps, could begin to break the ground. Naomi slipped into her car, the leather cool against her palms. She allowed herself one deep, steadying breath before turning the ignition. Tomorrow, the fight would begin again. The morning light filtered weakly through Naomi's office window, painting pale streaks across her desk. She had barely slept. The trial was over, yet the weight of it lingered like smoke after a fire. Her clerk, Emily, entered quietly, a stack of papers in her hands. Her face was tense, her movements cautious. Judge Carter, she said softly, placing a slim folder on the desk. This just came through. I thought you should see it. Naomi frowned, pulling the folder closer. The header read, Internal Review, Officer Ryan Walker. Her stomach sank as she began to read. The report detailed complaint after complaint. Incidents eerily similar to Marcus's. Racial profiling, unjustified stops, escalated confrontations without cause. Each grievance had been buried, dismissed, or quietly filed away. Walker hadn't been a lone mistake. He was a pattern, one the system had allowed to thrive. Naomi closed the file, pressing her palms flat against its cover as though holding back a flood. How many more like him are out there? She whispered. Emily's voice was low. Too many. And the department, they've been protecting him. Naomi exhaled slowly, her fury simmering just beneath the surface. Thank you, Emily. Leave it with me. When her clerk left, Naomi sat alone in silence, the folder heavy in front of her. The verdict had felt like progress yesterday. Now, staring at the evidence, it felt like only the beginning of a much larger war. That evening, Naomi sat in a quiet corner of a Baton Rouge cafe. The hum of conversations filled the air, but her focus was on the man across from her, Sergeant David Harris. She slid the folder across the table. You've seen this? Harris nodded grimly. I have. It's not good. No, Naomi said firmly. It's not good. It's broken. Complaints get buried. Reports get shelved. Officers like Walker are protected while communities suffer. Harris rubbed a hand over his tired face. That's the system, Judge. It's been this way for years. No one wants to admit it runs this deep. Naomi leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. Then maybe it's time someone forced them to admit it. Harris studied her, his eyes narrowing. You're talking about going public. Yes, Naomi said without hesitation. This can't stay in the shadows. People need to know. Harris sighed, leaning back. Judge, if you do this, it won't be easy. You'll face resistance from the department, from the unions, from the public. People don't want to believe the problem is this big. Naomi met his gaze without flinching. I don't care. This isn't about easy, it's about justice. If the system is broken, then we stop pretending it's not. For a long moment, Harris was silent. Then slowly he nodded. I'll stand with you, Judge. Whatever comes of this, we'll face it together. Naomi felt a flicker of something stir inside her. Not relief, not victory, but determination. The trial had been one battle. The war was only beginning. That evening, Naomi sat in her quiet home. The glow of the television flickered across the living room walls, news anchors dissecting every moment of the trial. To them, it was just another case, another headline, another story to be consumed. But to Naomi, it was something else. It was a glimpse into a system rotting from the inside. She muted the TV and stared at her phone for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. When the voice on the other end answered, Naomi felt a rush of both relief and resolve. "Maya," she said firmly, "we need to talk." The next afternoon, Naomi found herself in a quiet coffee shop tucked in downtown Baton Rouge. At a corner table sat Maya Williams, her old friend from law school, now one of the most relentless investigative journalists in the state. Maya looked exactly as Naomi remembered. Sharp eyes, steady presence, a notebook already open in front of her. "So," Maya said, leaning forward, "what's going on, Naomi? You sounded serious on the phone." Naomi wasted no time. She slid the thin folder across the table, the internal review on Officer Ryan Walker. As Maya read, her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to quiet fury. "You're telling me," she whispered, "this isn't the first time? There are multiple complaints, and they just buried them." Naomi nodded gravely. "This isn't just about Walker. It's bigger. It's the department, the system, and people need to know." Maya closed the folder slowly, her jaw tight. "Naomi, this is huge. If I publish this, it won't just be a story, it'll be a storm. The department, the unions, politicians, they'll come after you. And me." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "I know, but silence is worse. If the system is broken, then we stop pretending it isn't." Maya studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a determined smile curved her lips. "All right," she said. "Let's do it. I'll dig deeper. I'll find every buried complaint, every ignored warning, every officer they tried to protect. And when it's ready, we'll put it all out there." Naomi exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening just slightly. For the first time since the trial began, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Naomi glanced out the window. The city stretched before her, restless, divided, watching. This fight was far from over. The trial had been one step. Now came the next. "Let's make some noise," Naomi said quietly. And with that, part one of her battle for justice closed. Not with peace, but with preparation. Maya's office was a cluttered battlefield of files, sticky notes, and half-empty coffee mugs. She sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her sharp eyes. The thin folder Naomi had given her had been only the beginning. Once Maya started digging, the rot spread wider than she imagined. Dozens of misconduct complaints, all against Officer Ryan Walker, all buried, some dismissed as insufficient evidence, others marked unsubstantiated. But the patterns were unmistakable. Same neighborhoods, same descriptions, same excuses, and Walker wasn't alone. His name was just one of many. Late into the night, Maya called Naomi. Her voice buzzed with urgency. "Naomi, it's bigger than we thought. Walker isn't just a bad apple, he's one of many. I found other officers with similar patterns. Complaints ignored. Reports vanished. It's systematic." Naomi sat in her study, listening in silence as the words sank in. She had known the system was flawed, but hearing it laid bare like this, it hit differently. "How far back does it go?" she asked quietly. Maya hesitated. "Years, maybe decades, and I think I can prove it." The following morning, Naomi met Maya again, this time in a quiet library room where they wouldn't be disturbed. Stacks of old case files, disciplinary reports, and newspaper archives surrounded them. Maya spread documents across the table, her finger tapping each one with precision. "Look here," she said. "Walker stopped Marcus Daniels for looking out of place. 2 years earlier, he stopped another young man, same neighborhood, same excuse. The kid had no record. Charges were dropped. Still, his name is in the system now. Branded." Naomi's eyes hardened as she scanned the paper. "A pattern. It's deliberate." Maya nodded grimly. "And here's the kicker. Every time a complaint came in, the same supervisors signed off. Over and over." Naomi leaned back, fury building inside her. "They're protecting each other. It's not just bad policing. It's corruption." Naomi closed the file slowly, her jaw set. If this goes public, it won't just rattle Walker. It'll shake the whole department. Maya's eyes gleamed with fire. Good. That's exactly what needs to happen. For a moment, they sat in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of names buried in forgotten files. Naomi felt the weight of their stories pressing against her. This wasn't just an article anymore. This was a reckoning. Maya sat across from her editor in the bustling newsroom, the hum of ringing phones and clattering keyboards filling the air. Her laptop was open, the damning files spread across the screen. Walker isn't an isolated case, she said firmly. This is systemic. The complaints, the cover-ups, the supervisors protecting him. It's all there. And I can prove it. Her editor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and skeptical eyes, leaned back in his chair. Maya, do you realize what you're asking? This isn't a puff piece. You're taking on the entire police department. If we run this, they'll come after you and us. Maya's jaw tightened. Then let them. The truth matters more than their comfort. That night, Naomi received a call. The voice on the other end was low, almost threatening. Judge Carter, the caller said. You need to tell your friend to stop digging. For her own good. Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? The line went dead. Her chest constricted. But her resolve didn't falter. She knew intimidation when she heard it, and she knew it meant they were getting close to the truth. The next morning, Maya called Naomi, her voice unshaken despite the storm brewing. They won't scare me off, she said flatly. If they're threatening us, it means we've hit a nerve, which means we're onto something real. Naomi exhaled slowly. Then be careful. They'll protect themselves at any cost. Maya's voice carried steel. So will I. Meanwhile, Sergeant David Harris visited Naomi in her chambers. His expression was grim. I've been hearing things, he said. Whispers that the department knows someone's digging into their records. They're not happy. You need to be careful. Naomi looked up from her desk, her eyes steady. Sergeant, I've been careful my whole life. Careful hasn't fixed anything. Harris studied her, then gave a slow nod. Then I guess careful won't cut it anymore. The decision was made. Maya's article would run. The truth was coming, and neither intimidation nor fear could stop it. The article hit the stands on a humid Thursday morning. Front page. Bold letters. Systemic cover-up. Baton Rouge Police Department buries misconduct complaints. Maya's words cut like a blade. Meticulous. Backed by evidence. Impossible to dismiss. Every line was laced with testimonies, sealed files, and the undeniable proof that Officer Ryan Walker wasn't alone. By noon, the story had gone national. Cable news anchors debated it on split screens. Talk shows dissected it. Social media exploded with outrage, hashtags trending across the country. At the courthouse, Naomi walked through the marble halls, reporters swarming like hornets. Judge Carter, do you support the allegations? Did you help leak the files? Do you believe the police department covered up misconduct? Microphones thrust toward her, cameras flashing in her face. Naomi's lips pressed into a firm line as security ushered her through the crowd. She said nothing, but inside, her heart pounded. The truth was out, but so was the fire. That evening, Naomi sat in her chambers. The phone rang nonstop. Calls from politicians, officials, even anonymous threats. One message stood out. A voicemail dripping with venom. You should have stayed quiet, Judge. You don't know what you've started. Naomi's hand clenched around the receiver. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Fear was there, but so was resolve. Across town, Maya faced her own storm. News vans parked outside her apartment, colleagues calling nonstop, and strangers flooding her inbox, half praising her bravery, half spitting threats. Still, she kept typing, digging, following new leads pouring in by the hour. Let them come, she muttered under her breath. The truth is stronger. Meanwhile, protests erupted downtown. Crowds gathered with signs reading justice for Marcus and end police cover UPS. Voices rose in unison. echoing off skyscrapers and across the streets. The city pulsed with anger, energy, and a new kind of hope. Naomi watched it unfold on her television late that night, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. The movement had begun, and now there was no turning back. By the end of the week, Baton Rouge was a city on fire. The protests that began downtown spread like wildfire. Students marched from college campuses. Church leaders led candlelight vigils, and families filled the streets with chants that echoed into the night. Justice for Marcus. End the cover-ups. Television screens across the nation broadcast the scenes. Peaceful marches by day, tense standoffs by night. Police lines faced protesters with shields raised, their presence only fueling the anger in the air. Inside the courthouse, Naomi sat in her chambers, her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages poured in, some thanking her for standing firm, others calling her a traitor. One email made her pause. "You're destroying our community. If anything happens to my family because of your lies, it'll be on your hands." Her hand hovered above the keyboard, but she didn't reply. The words cut deep, but she couldn't let them derail her. Sergeant David Harris faced his own backlash. Officers he had served with for years now looked at him like a traitor. Whispered words followed him in the hallways. Snitch, backstabber, coward. One afternoon, he found his locker vandalized. Red spray paint scrawled across it. Blue before black. He stood frozen, his fists clenching at his sides. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a threat. But Harris didn't clean it off. He left it there, a scar in the hallway for everyone to see. Meanwhile, the Baton Rouge Police Department announced an internal investigation. Cameras flashed as the chief stood at a podium, insisting the department would review all allegations thoroughly. But Maya wasn't convinced. Watching the press conference from her newsroom, she muttered under her breath, "A review isn't justice. It's a cover." She scribbled notes furiously. This wasn't over, not even close. That night, Naomi and Harris met again at the quiet cafe. Both looked more tired than before. "They're circling the wagons," Harris said. "They'll throw Walker under the bus if they have to, but the bigger system, they'll protect it at all costs." Naomi sipped her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Then we don't stop. We push harder. The protests, the article, the investigation, it's all fuel. We have to keep it burning." Harris studied her, then gave a slow nod. "Then we're in this until the end." The protests that had begun with chants and candlelight shifted as the days dragged on. By the sixth night, Baton Rouge was boiling. Anger turned into confrontation. A thrown bottle. Police shield shoved forward. Sirens cut through the humid air. Tear gas rolled across the streets, scattering the crowd into alleys and parking lots. What had begun as peaceful cries for justice was spiraling into chaos. In the newsroom, Maya typed furiously, her hands shaking from exhaustion. The hate mail had doubled since the article. Anonymous messages filled her inbox, some vile, others threatening. That night, when she returned to her car, she froze. Her windshield was shattered. Red spray paint covered the hood. "Liar!" Maya's chest tightened, but she didn't scream. Instead, she pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. "Evidence. Proof. This means they're scared," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "And if they're scared, I'm doing something right." Back at the courthouse, Naomi sat alone in her chambers long after sunset. Files lay unopened on her desk. Outside, the sound of distant sirens carried through the night. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number. "Judges should know when to keep their mouths shut. Last warning." Naomi's hands tightened around the phone. For the first time in years, she felt fear coil deep in her stomach. Not for herself, but for what this fight was becoming. Later that night, she met with Sergeant Harris in a quiet parking lot, the hum of streetlights above them. "They're coming after us harder," Harris said grimly. "Maya's car was trashed. I've been followed twice this week. They're trying to scare us off." Naomi's voice was low, but steady. "And is it working?" Harris looked at her, his jaw set. "Not on me." The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Naomi didn't answer right away. She stared out into the dark city, sirens echoing faintly in the distance. If she stayed quiet, she could retreat into safety, protect her position, protect herself. But silence had already cost too much. Finally, she turned back to Harris, her eyes hard. I'm ready. The city was restless. The courthouse steps, once a symbol of order, had become the center of a storm. Hundreds gathered outside, holding signs, chanting Marcus Daniels's name, demanding accountability. The air buzzed with tension, but also with something else. Anticipation. For days, Judge Naomi Carter had remained silent, refusing interviews and dodging reporters. But tonight, she walked slowly out onto the courthouse steps, her black robe catching the glow of floodlights. The crowd quieted instantly. Cameras clicked. Microphones pushed forward. Naomi raised her hand, her voice steady. I am not here as a politician. I am not here as a spokesperson. I am here as a judge, and as a black woman in America. The silence deepened. Even the sirens in the distance seemed to fade. Naomi's voice carried, strong and unwavering. For too long, our communities have been told to wait, to be patient, to trust a system that has betrayed us over and over again. But justice delayed is justice denied. And silence is no longer an option. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, swelling into shouts of support. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Students, parents, elders, children, people who had been waiting for someone in power to say what they already knew. I was profiled outside this very courthouse, Naomi continued. Stopped, questioned, judged not by my actions but by the color of my skin. And I wear these robes. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Gasps and cries rose from the crowd. A chant began softly at first, then louder. No more silence. No more silence. Reporters scribbled furiously. News crews broadcast live, Naomi's words echoing across the country in real time. She raised her voice above the roar of the crowd. This is not about one officer. It is not about one case. This is about a system that protects itself while failing the people it swore to serve. That must end. And it will end not because they choose it, but because we demand it. The chants turned into a thunderous wave. Fists rose high. Signs waved furiously. The courthouse steps shook with the sound of unity. Naomi stepped back, her chest rising and falling. For the first time in her career, she had broken the unspoken rule of silence. And she knew there was no turning back. Later that night, Naomi sat in her car, the noise of the rally still echoing in her ears. Her phone buzzed with endless messages. Praise, criticism, threats. She ignored them all. Instead, she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her voice, her truth had been unleashed, and now nothing could silence it again. Within days of Naomi's speech, the protests spread beyond Baton Rouge. New Orleans, Houston, Atlanta, crowds filled highways, blocking traffic with chants that refused to be ignored. News networks carried the images 24/7. Mothers with strollers marching, veterans holding signs, teenagers leading chants with megaphones. What began as a local case had ignited into a national movement. In Washington, senators called for hearings. Civil rights groups demanded federal investigations. For the first time in years, Baton Rouge was at the center of a national conversation about systemic injustice. But with the momentum came backlash. Pundits on television called Naomi reckless. Anonymous callers flooded her courthouse office with threats. Her name trended online, half in support, half in scorn. Naomi read the headlines in silence. The noise was deafening, but her resolve only sharpened. Maya kept digging. Her articles uncovered more names, more cover-ups, more victims. Each revelation fueled the fire. One night, she called Naomi, her voice firm but tired. This is bigger than both of us now. No matter what they throw at us, the truth is out there. And it's not going back in the dark. Naomi closed her eyes, hearing the weight of those words. She knew Maya was right. Sergeant Harris remained steadfast at Naomi's side. One evening, as they walked together past the courthouse steps still littered with protest signs, he said softly, "You realize this isn't about one trial anymore. This is about the whole damn system." Naomi looked up at the courthouse columns towering above them. For years, those walls had symbolized justice to her. Now, she saw them for what they were, fortresses protecting power. She nodded. "Then we tear it down. Brick by brick if we have to." That night, Naomi stood by her window, gazing out at the city lights. The fight ahead would be long. She would lose allies. She would face fear. But she also knew something had shifted, something irreversible. The system had been challenged. The silence had been broken. And the movement had begun. She whispered to herself, steady as stone, "This is only the beginning."